Hey, so next up, we're going to start looking into some different types of variables. We're going to look at arrays first and figure out what arrays are, why they're theoretically useful, and then see a little example of an array being used with the function that we already went over in the last couple of videos. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to comment out what we already did. Now, I can do this by typing // in front of everything. You can see it goes gray like that. Or I can highlight the whole thing, and on my computer, I press Control/ and it comments it all out. If you're on a Mac, I believe it would be that like Option/, same kind of deal. And that lets us comment out a whole bunch of lines at once. So now none of this will run. Now I'm going to scroll down a bit, and I'm going to comment in this. So here I have another function, and it, like I said, these functions do the same thing, but in slightly different ways so that you can get a feel for how different variables work. And this is going to pick a random word from an array. So we have an array right here. So what is an array? An array is basically a list of different variables. It's a list of either numbers or strings, or numbers and strings, or other stuff that we'll get into. You can have arrays inside arrays as well. So arrays basically are like a list of variables. So in theory, why would we ever make a list? Well, sometimes it's easier to store data as a list instead of having to define like let first kid in class equals Sasha, let second kid in class equals Dave, let third kid in class equals Victor. That becomes really verbose and long, and you get confused, and it just becomes a mess in the code. So we want to sometimes have kind of a shorthand for making a list of a bunch of these. So we might have a list of students in a class, like I said, or we might have a list of, say, like relay times that came back from a particular relay team. So if we just for the moment comment this out, and I'm going to write what we do to normally make an array, I'll say let array example equals, and we put this square bracket, and then we would put, Sasha, Dave, and Victor, and then let's just console log this. We'll console log array example. We'll save that, pop it open in a new window, and let's check it out in our dev tools. Okay, so we have this thing that says array3. If we click it, we see it says 0, 1, and 2, and it says length 3. So it's quite obvious that this is a list. It puts them in order, and it gives us the length of it. Now, a funny thing that we always have to deal with as programmers is that arrays always start with the 0 rather than the first element. And this is just a wacky thing that you have to get used to. So you can see here, 0 is Sasha, Dave is 1, and Victor is 2. Even though the length of the array is 3, the highest number in there is 2. So it's kind of weird. So that's important because as we look at later how we reference items in arrays, sometimes you have to put in that number. So for instance, let's just look at that right now. If I wanted to just give us like the second item in the array, you might think I put something like, oh, get me the second item. We can reference it again with these square brackets. But actually, if I want to get the second item, I have to do 1. So now if I save that, reload, and we check our dev tools, it'll give me Dave, and Dave, if we remember, was the second item. So a bit funny. You don't have to worry about this little syntax right now, but there is a way to reference specific items, and we often get confused because the first element's actually 0, not 1. So we call, just to confuse you more, because we already have a thing in HTML called elements, we call each item in an array, we call an element of the array. So to get the first element, the second element, the third element. Again, one of the things we do with arrays is make lists. And arrays are good for this because they keep things in order. Whatever order we put it in for the array is the order we're going to get it back. So if we wanted to have the students in alphabetical order, we could put them in alphabetical order, or we could sort them, which is a whole other world. Or let's say we have all the relay times. We have individual relay times, 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, and we wanted to add them all up. We can do that in some nice ways with arrays. They just make stuff that involves handling a list a lot easier, and so that's why we use it. Now, a really important thing that we do with arrays that is not going to be in our little example, but it's really important, is we do this thing called looping. Now, looping is a really key concept in programming. It happens across all languages, and the idea is that you go over every element in an array and do something to it, okay? So this is kind of abstract, and the only example I can really come up with is also sort of abstract until we start doing things with real code. But for instance, let's say we wanted to know how many letters are in every student's name. Well, what I can do here is I can write array example for each. So how this thing works, we're going to go over a little bit more later. Just follow along just for the concept of it right now, not all the details. We would write function name, and it'll then give us every name as it's doing its little loop. Then here we can console log name.length, okay? Again, just ignore how this function, how this is kind of made. We're going to go over that later on, don't worry. So when we loop it now, we can see it outputs the array, and then there's 5 letters in Sasha, there's 4 letters in Dave, and 6 letters in Victor. Okay, so again, not really that useful, just the core idea is that we can do this loop. And looping is quite important. It's something we do a lot in all programming languages. And we're not always looping over arrays. Sometimes we're just looping a certain number of times to do something. Again, examples will be better later. You'll get this when you're actually using it in practice, but knowing the core idea is important here. Okay, so let's delete this and let's look at our function in the terms of using an array instead of these separately defined variables that we did last time. So at the start of our little pick a random word from an array function, we define an array which has our word 1, word 2, and word 3. Okay, that's cool. And then here we'll console log the random number, which is the same thing we did previously. We just console log the random number. And the if statements are all the same. We have this if it's less than half, return the first one. If it's less than half, return word 1. Now this is just like that reference I showed you before. It's getting the 0th element. That's what we call it, the 0th element in the array. If it's between 0.5 and 0.75, get the first element, which is actually the second element. I know. And if it's greater than 0.75, get the second element, which is actually the third. So again, that weird thing with the 0 is actually the first element comes into play here very importantly. But the core idea is that instead of defining them all individually, we define them up at the top in this little array, and then we can reference each one however we need, whenever we want. So now if I save that and I load it, we're going to get something expected. So we get our 0.66, which puts us right, oh, that's the wrong one, which puts us right into this greater than half and less than 0.75. So it returns word 2. Awesome. It works. It does the same thing we already did, but this time we're just using a new type of variable, which is called an array. And so in this video, we talked a bit about arrays, and we talked about the idea of looping as a concept, the idea of running some code repeatedly, probably on every element of an array, or in some cases, which we didn't go over, just a certain number of times. So as a concept, I wanted to get that to you. In the next video, we'll go over another type of variable called an object, which is even more crazy than an array.